Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody, to the September meeting of the Utilities Advisory Commission. Why don't we go ahead and start with roll call. And I'm just going to read out your names in order that I've seen them. Vice Chair Siegel.
Present.
Commissioner Bowie.
Present.
Commissioner Metz.
Present.
Commissioner Johnston.
Present.
Okay, and unfortunately, Commissioners Scharf and Smith let us know they won't be able to make it today. But I see we also have Council Member Filsteth with us.
Mosh.
And I'm here as well. All right, with that, agenda review and revisions. I don't believe that we have any for this meeting, so we can go straight to oral communications. If there are any members of the public that want to speak on a matter that is not on today's agenda, now would be the time to do that. We usually allow 3 minutes for each speaker. Do we have anybody who's indicated that they'd like to speak?
If anyone from the public would like to speak, please raise your hand. I do not see any hands raised.
Okay. Very well, then we can move on to the minutes. Are there any comments or potential revisions to the minutes that any commissioners want to propose? Commissioner Metz.
Yes, I had a few revisions. Let's see. Oh, on page 8, I think it's the second to last paragraph. The word flushed should be fleshed. We don't want to flush the smart grid. Okay, and on page 10, there's a sentence. This is in the third to last paragraph. He suggested adding, it should be consumption-based emission reduction, not consumption-based on. And the phrase after that should be distributed energy resources, not distribution of energy resources.
Okay. Was that it for you, Commissioner Metz?
Yes.
Were there any other suggested revisions? Doesn't look like it. Do we have a motion for approving the minutes as revised by Commissioner Metz?
I'll move to approve the minutes as revised.
Do you have a second?
I will second.
All right, we'll do a quick roll. Vice Chair Siegel?
Abstain.
Oh, that's right, you weren't here last week. Okay. All right, Commissioner Bowie. Just so you know, Commissioner Bowie, we can barely hear you.
Okay, I will sit closer. I'll do a little adjustment too.
But I think you said yes, yes?
I did say it.
All right, Commissioner Metz,
Yes.
Commissioner Johnston,
Yes.
and I vote to approve the minutes as well. So it passes with the minimum required 4 votes.
Can I ask who seconded the motion? Sorry about that. I missed it.
I think Commissioner Metz
Okay.
and Bowie both did.
At the same time? I know.
I
Mr.
heard
Johnson?
Commissioner Metz because I only saw Commissioner Bowie, but his audio was so low.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, and if I can you hear me now as well?
Yeah, that's much
Yes,
better.
we can.
Thanks. All right, I don't think we have any unfinished business from last week. So then we'll go to the Utilities Director report. Director Batchelor.
Yes, thank you, Chair Fussell. Evening, Commissioners. A couple of real quick updates. Governor Newsom has requested that all California volunteer reduce the water by 15% from last year's usage. Also, the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission has requested that same volunteer 15% reduction from wholesale water agencies, which is us. We're in that mode. And then also, as we heard, that Valley Water has set forth a mandatory 15% water use reduction compared to their 2019 water retail use. So we're not quite there as where Valley is. Our water is actually in a better shape than where Valley is. Again, that on August 20th, the SFPUC received water supply procurement orders from several points of divisions from the San Joaquin watershed. And they are actually looking for human consumptions, which is around below 55 gallons per capita per day. So again, our water situation is a little bit better than some of the other water agencies at this period of time. Also too is that National Drive Electric Week is September 25th through October the 3rd. This is a national campaign to raise awareness of many benefits from electric vehicles, sponsoring an EV workshop presented by Acteria on September the 28th from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. It's a virtual event, but it will address any of the questions about how chargers work at your home, as well as public chargers, different types of vehicles. And then also during that week, Acteria is also going online in person, events happening for EV battery operated e-bikes and expos and rides and drives. So that's actually going to take place live. But again, you can go on to the city of Palo Alto's .org workshops or Acteria's website to get more information on that. Also too is that power content label. We've been talking a little bit about our power content label in the past. We have our 2020 power content label. It's been published and it's been delivered to utility customers in the month of September through the utility bill inserts. If you're not really familiar with that, it's like the nutrition facts shown on ingredients, food cans, and packaging. It really basically says the power content label shows the source of electricity purchased by Palo Alto Power and local homes and businesses. It's also online. If anybody is interested in looking at it, it's on cityofpaloalto.org/power content label. Pretty easy to find, and you'll be able to take a look at our 2020 label. Also, the last thing I wanted to bring up is SCAP Ad Hoc Committee. The next meeting for Sustainability and Climate Action Plan, SCAP, is September the 9th. If you're looking to register that you would like to participate in that, it's on the city website, cityofpaloalto.org, to be able to get into the meeting that's going to be going on. Again, that's September the 9th. So with that, that concludes my report.
Thank you very much. All right, I think we can head straight into today's new business, starting with a discussion of permit processes for various energy technologies. And we're going to go to public comment in 1 second. The thing that I wanted to mention to commissioners is that there was some discussion of whether this should be an action item or a discussion item today. And what we decided was that today should remain discussion, but that if we feel like there is a specific policy recommendation that we want to make to City Council, we can bring it back next month, but that we did not want to undertake today discussing and trying to put together some kind of specific motion. So I just want to put that out there. And then I will next ask if there are members of the public that want to address this topic.
Anyone from the public would like to speak to this topic regarding permitting processes? Please raise your hand. Okay, so far I see 1, 2, and possibly 3 hands, OB. So first, Mr. Cole, I will unmute you. One
Yep,
second.
and just as a reminder, we'll do 3 minutes per speaker.
All right, Mr. Cole, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, commissioners. I did send in my comments to you yesterday, and I'd just like to reiterate the quote that I said from Albert Einstein, is that we can't solve the current problem with the same thinking that got us into that situation in the first place. And that's where we find ourselves today. In 2014, there was a concerted effort, same issue, solar permitting was out of hand and very onerous and difficult, contractors leaving, charging extra, and went through a big process, stakeholder meeting, all the whole thing. And it got better for a very short period of time, and then it went back to the same old thing. And so we find ourselves here, as I read the report, in the same situation. And it seems that, I know staff has been working very hard on it, but I don't know that they're able to address that because they're the same thinking going on. So I think they've gotten really good at efficiently executing inappropriate requirements. And the staff report, it didn't show that they had changed any of the Palo Alto specific only requirements. And in fact, they doubled down on the AC disconnect, which is a requirement from utilities. I will not address that right now because it would take all the rest of my time, except to say that I agree with past Commissioner Don Jackson and his remarks about AC disconnects. I did meet with staff. They could not give me any facts. And in the end of the day, the only thing they could say is that utilities feel that's what they need to be safe. So it was a feeling, it wasn't based on fact. But again, I won't spend any more time on that. Moving forward, what I would like to see and what I'd actually like to see the UAC recommend to council is that the planning department adopt the Solar App Plus application by NREL. This has been 10 years in the making. It is a way to enter in and bypass all plan check, go straight to a permit, and it also spits out a checklist for inspectors to use. So now all the inspections are the same. The same information goes to the applicant. They know exactly what's going to happen at the inspection. There's no second guessing what's going to happen. A lot of big players, I mean, NREL, UL, Tesla, Sunrun, all the big players are in this. And there's been glowing reports on the first adoptions that have happened here. In addition, this app will take on storage, which wasn't mentioned in the report, but it's still taking 4 or 5 months for permitting. So that was specifically left out of the report, which is, I find, a little incomplete, to say the least. And a lot of our systems are now having storage. It'll do storage, and in the future, it'll cover all electrification issues. Heat pump water heaters, EV chargers, heat pump furnaces. So to get in this now would be a really great deal. It would offload staff a whole ton of work. If we look at the heat pump water heaters that need to be installed in Palo Alto, if we're going to meet our 80 by 30 goal, it's 6 permits a day in additional to what you're doing. And this doesn't count the additional solar that's going to happen or the heat pump space heating that's going to be required to meet our goal. So to have this in place where plan check is automatic, correct by design, would be a really great thing. There is 20 million state.
Mr. Cole, just to let you know, you're at 4 minutes if you're able to wind it up.
I'm sorry. There's 20 million in state funding to help jurisdictions do that, and it's free to jurisdictions. So if the planning department decides not to do that, I think they have a lot of explaining to do why they can think they can do better, faster, cheaper. And I would like to see a recommendation from UAC to please accept this going forward. Thank you very much for the extra time. I appreciate it.
And the next speaker we have is Mr. Kelly. Please unmute.
Yeah, Chair Forcell, I guess I was a little late joining the meeting. I actually wanted to speak during the oral communications, and the comments that I had are not really directed to this point. So I should probably just write to the commission and speak to you at the next meeting.
Yeah, sorry we missed you. We zipped through the beginning, but I do think that that's the procedure we have to follow. Sorry about that.
No, it's my mistake. Thank
We
you.
look forward to your email.
Are there any other speakers for this topic? I do not see any more hands raised.
Okay. Then we can go into, is there a staff report or presentation?
Hi, good afternoon, or guess good evening at this point, Chair and UAC Commissioners. Mr. Batchelor, can I launch in?
Yeah, of course.
Great, thank you. So I'm Jonathan Late. I'm the Director for Planning and Development Services. And you may recall, for some of you at least, we were here back in April, and we had an opportunity to have a conversation about some of the challenges and the complaints that we were receiving about our electrification permit process. And you may recall that there was a consultant's report that had a number of recommendations, and we've done some work on our own. And fully acknowledging that we have some challenges, and we were taking too long to process these permits, and we heard very clearly about some of the inconsistencies and some of the challenges with the inspection part of our program. Since then, there's been I think some articles, and I've provided a blog post response, and we've done a number of things to sort of enhance our communication. But I think more importantly, what we've done is we're taking on this project, not just our department, but working interdepartmentally with other city departments that have a role in this process. And we're working to, one, acknowledge and understand the issues and concerns, and to begin to put forward a game plan to help address some of these issues. Some of them are short-term fixes that we can move forward. Others may take a little bit more time. And so you have in your packet a staff report that identifies a number of items that we have implemented thus far since our April conversation, and things that we are working on presently but haven't finished, and things that we are hoping to tackle toward the latter part of the year and going into next year. We committed to the UAC to report back every 4 months or so, and receive your perspective, feedback, and suggestions on how we still might be able to do things better. Recognizing that we've known about this for a bit, and we've in earnest been trying to tackle these issues now really since that April-May timeframe. And I feel like we've accomplished a lot. And I know we're not where we want to be yet, but we still have a lot of work to do. But we've got a great team of representatives from fire, from utilities, and planning to help make this process more efficient going into the future. So with that, I'll pause, and I'm happy to answer any questions from commissioners. And we got a number of staff members here who can now back me up on some of the technical issues that I may not be completely up to speed on. But Chair, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you for those remarks. Commissioners, who wants to start with questions or comments? Commissioner Metz.
Yes. Yes, Sir Late, thank you very much for your introduction. I had two questions. One is, are we measuring the start to finish timeline? I mean, if I understood from the document for this meeting, and also the April 7th document, that we're measuring time from request to a permit, giving approval to start construction. But so the first question is, are we also measuring timeline from start to actually completing the project? Because after all, that's what everybody wants, right? Is to be able to take a shower. And the other, right? The other question is, I read the consultant's report, and has there been, it sounds like they've talked with other communities, particularly in the local area, but has there been benchmarking of what other utilities, particularly obviously munis similar to Palo Alto, have done in terms of addressing these kinds of problems? Because I mean, the problems seem pretty common to all utilities, and we can't be the first people to run into this. So I'd appreciate your feedback on those two questions.
Okay, certainly I can answer the first one, and then I'll just maybe prime Mr. Batchelor for any utility benchmarking. Maybe just so the commission, just to sort of level set a little bit on my role and how it intersects into these different departments. So I'm responsible for the permitting side and the inspection side of this whole process, not just electrification permits, but all the building activity that takes place in Palo Alto. And so, and what we run is the development center. And the development center is this interdepartmental team of representatives from different departments that are managed by other department heads and managers in those different programs. And what we try to do is consolidate and coordinate that review process so that we're interacting with our customers in a as seamless a way as possible. So when it comes to benchmarking some specific aspects in utilities, I'm going to defer that to Dean, and you may have some specific aspects that you're interested in. But on the first part with the report tracking, absolutely. And I will say that we're just getting started on this for electrification permits specifically. So we're still building our reporting out on this, but we can track when a permit comes in, how long the city takes on it, how long the applicant spends with it, and we can do those iterative cycles from start to finish issuance of a building permit. We didn't include that in this report, and we can certainly provide that with subsequent reports. So yes, we can track the city time and applicant time so that we have that understanding of where any delays may be in that process. Dean, would you want to respond to the other part?
From electrical standpoint, after the permit, when an applicant actually comes in for a permit and has to look at from electrical standpoint, we actually have set a goal for 5 days of a review period of time that we can look at an applicant, take a look at what those electrical needs are going to be, and review it, and then try to get it back within those 5 days. Now, there are some exceptions to that, depending on what, how detailed someone is looking for. If they're asking for storage, PV, it could get a little longer on that portion of it. But typically what we're shooting for is we're looking for a 5-day turnaround period on that. And we've been tracking those.
And I'm sorry, I misunderstood, I guess, the benchmarking question when you were talking about comparing to other utilities. And if you are referring to how long does it take our departments to do those reviews, that is something that we are tracking as well. We have set up some turnaround times on that. Dean spoke to the 5-day turnaround. So I can talk a little bit more about that if you're interested. We have made some recent changes in that regard.
Let me clarify. On the first question, I was asking if we're looking at the time from first contact to actually completed project, right? Because that's what ultimately is important, right? That you complete the photovoltaic installation or the heat pump water heater or whatever. Yep. And the second part on benchmarking, I was, there's a whole bunch of barriers to improving this process. And then I'm asking very broadly, have we looked at what other folks facing the similar challenges across the spectrum of all the barriers, what they do, and what we might emulate in Palo Alto?
Yeah, and I appreciate the question, and it may be so broad that I'm struggling to answer your question. There are aspects of, so it touches on a number of things. It's the timeline, it's what we're looking for, it's our, I'm happy to respond to any of those, but if you're asking, have we looked at how long it takes to process a similar permit in another jurisdiction? I don't know that we have that data, but I also don't know, a lot of these other jurisdictions are also running through a separate utility provider, right? So we don't know how long it takes for PG&E to process these permits or what's involved in that. I don't know if Mr. Batchelor has knowledge about that. So we also have to remember when people talk about how long it takes to get a permit in Palo Alto, in Mountain View, they're just dealing with the city on very discrete issues, they're not dealing with the utility aspect of it, which they have to do separately. Here, it's all together. And so, that's just part of our process and timeline as well.
I can tell you from a utility perspective that we have looked at other jurisdictions. We haven't looked at PG&Es, but what we have done is we've looked at other cities. We belong to the NCPA, the Northern Power Association. There's 14 other utilities in that group, or actually 13. Sorry, we're the 14th. We haven't looked at that. We've looked at what their processes are from a utilities perspective on looking at how long the permits take, how long it takes for getting the information back to the planning department, back to the applicant. We have been tracking some of that. So we have done some benchmarks with other utilities.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Johnston?
Thank you, and thank you to the staff for the report and for the work that you're doing on this issue, because it's obviously one that's important and is getting attention from the community. I've got two questions. The first really goes to this lockable AC disconnect, and I don't pretend to fully understand what that is, but I understand that PG&E does not require it. We have required it in the past, and it sounds like we have decided to continue to require that in order to get a permit. And so I had two questions. One is that a final decision, or is that something that's still under consideration? And second, I think it would be helpful to have some articulation of why we think the lockable AC disconnect is important, even though PG&E doesn't. Not that we're trying to emulate PG&E safety records.
So Commissioner Johnson, so there are, PG&E, Silicon Valley, right next door to us. They do not ask for an AC disconnect. We are, from a utilities perspective, we are still holding that an AC disconnect is necessary here in the city of Palo Alto. It's basically based for the safety of our employees. We do have, the idea is that we don't believe, as Mr. Cole said earlier, there's really no scientist facts, or there's no nothing that's in the writing portions of it out there. There are some safety factors that are built into some of the equipment, but we ask for a visual disconnect. So this is actually a physical disconnect that sets right behind the meter that you actually open, and there's actually some blades that make contact. When you actually open it up, those blades actually open it up. And what we're worried about is that we're worried about the backfeed that could potentially come back through from a PV system that if we're working on a line, it re-energizes itself. So we're actually worried about the backfeed. Now what PG&E does, and similar, some of the larger utilities, they actually pull the electric meters out. So you can actually pull the electric meter totally out of the socket, and that actually stops the same concept as this AC disconnect. And I think that at this point, I think I'll ask Deacon Singh to actually share a video that we had put together that we wanted to show the commission tonight, to talk a little bit, show a little bit about what could actually happen about pulling a meter. And then I'll go into it a little bit further after that. So with that, Deacon, do you have your video?
Yes, I do.
Great. Can you share that?
Absolutely. Good evening, Chair Forcell, Commission, and bear with me while I pull up that video and I'm able to share that. I'll be a quick second. Okay. Are you able to see a YouTube page?
Yes.
Okay, great. So these are our electric folks working on a panel, and I'll play the video. As you can see, this is something inherently dangerous. And just to add to what Dean had mentioned, pulling a meter that was never designed as a disconnecting means. Okay? AC disconnect is by design a mechanism that we could use, so we could visibly see an air gap between those contacts. So we have a confirmation that there will not be any energy transfer from the customer side to our utility. And it's lockable in the open position. So when our folks are out there working, they open up the AC disconnect, they're able to see the air gap between the contacts, and they are able to lock. So inadvertently, somebody doesn't go back and puts it on again. And so that's why, we looked into quite a few other options as well, including this pulling the meter as an option for disconnecting. But for safety reasons, we decided it's best interest of our staff and equipment and even the customer that we keep the AC disconnect requirement.
So that was very helpful to me to understand kind of what it is and why we have the requirement, and that's a pretty dramatic video. So thank you for that. My second question, it goes to the Solar App Plus permitting issue that there seems to be a lot of interest in the community. And I guess my question there is kind of, it sounds like we have been in contact with Solar App Plus and are evaluating whether that's something that Palo Alto could adopt. But what's going to be the process for that evaluation, and how long do we think it's going to take? Because it does seem like there's a lot of potential benefits to that app.
Yeah, thank you. I want to respond to this, but I will, and I also want to come back to that AC disconnect after this as well. We are also super excited about being able to participate in Solar App Plus, and I appreciate Mr. Cole's comments. We don't need recommendation from the UAC to council on this. This is something that we are pursuing. We are working with our departments. We see the benefits of this type of a system, not only from the staff workload issues that Mr. Cole noted, but also just to have a better sense of consistency and expectation, pulling the permit and having that inspection process, flow from the Solar App Plus. So we're engaged. Mr. George Hoyt, our building official, has been running point on that in our conversations. And I think as far as timeline, in our staff report, we laid out that we hoped to report back on an update. But maybe George, can you give us a better sense for sort of where we are in the conversation? And another key piece about this is looking at the interdepartmental requirements, which have to get fed into, there's the state standards. But now, again, because we're our own utility, we have to fold in our utility standards on that as well. And we're also very excited about the ESS as a component of this as well. George, can you offer any more on that?
Yes, good evening, commissioners. My name is George Hoyt. I'm the chief building official for the city of Palo Alto. And I have been working in a direct dialogue with Solar App Plus over the last few months regarding this mechanism. And we've set up several meetings with them. And we are looking at these particular requirements that are associated with Palo Alto as in this AC disconnect, and how can we relay that in this application process. The Solar App Plus process is really an independent process that looks for code compliance, building and fire code compliance of a solar system if it meets a certain criteria, and it's being installed by a licensed contractor. Only licensed contractors can pull this. A homeowner could not pull this. An unlicensed contractor could not pull a Solar App Plus program. Plus, it has to meet a set of criteria, eligibility criteria. So we're working through those components. We had a meeting with utilities just last week to go over some of their requirements. And I will also say that, you know, the whole idea is to circumvent the review process. So, you know, basically building and fire, the review process would take place electronically. And so we wouldn't have any interaction in that. But then if other departments need to see it, let's say that this piece of equipment is outside and planning needs to review it, or if this piece of equipment needs further analysis because of the system size based on utilities requirements, those could be some challenges that we're going to have to work through with Solar App to see if that's even a feasible situation through the process. But we are well engaged in this effort with Solar App, and we have been for the last month or so. And I know that I think I have another meeting with fire to talk about some of these particulars early next week. So hopefully that answers your questions and gives you the timeline. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Chair Forcell, if I can just on the first part of that question about the AC disconnect, I think, can I offer another?
Please.
Thank you. So, so Dean responded to the technical, or, you know, the sort of the requirement that we have. But I also wanted to share because we've gotten a lot of complaints about multiple AC disconnects too. And there's through these, our conversations internally, we've been able to, really understand where does that AC disconnect requirement come from. And before, I think, as we're processing these permits, a plan reviewer might be looking at this and say, oh, they got an AC disconnect here. I don't need it for my purposes here, but maybe that's a requirement for fire and that's placed there. And then when it gets to utilities, that's, we see that there's the AC disconnect at this location, but that doesn't serve our need to cut the energy to the grid. And so at some point we started getting these multiple disconnects. And either because we weren't, looking at the system holistically and trying to isolate whether or not one disconnect would, if it were designed differently, could one disconnect solve the problem? And so we started seeing these multiple disconnects, which of course added, cost to the installation. And so through our coordination meetings, we have been able to, be very clear with our team that for at least for fire and for building, the meter itself, the disconnect in the service panel is sufficient. And so now when these systems come in and they have more than one disconnect, we're asking the contractor, why are you designing it this way? If you consider designing it a different way, you might get by with only one disconnect. There may be reasons, as we said in the staff report, where somebody might want to install more than one disconnect, but now when we get these plans in and we see more than one, we're asking the question as to why. And it may be that the design of the existing system, and if they're adding to it, necessitates a second disconnect, but at least we're now asking that question and seeing if we can get by with one in the design stage. So so yes, we require an AC disconnect, but we only require one if it's designed properly. And that's what we're trying to put together, some line drawings and post those online so that people understand when we would make that requirement, or when we have that requirement, and how to design it in a way so that you don't need multiple disconnects. Thank you.
Great, thank
for
you.
that follow-up. Commissioner Johnston, did you have more questions?
No, that's it. That's very helpful. And I'm really pleased to hear that we are, proceeding as we are.
Vice Chair Siegel.
Thank you. Mr. Late, thank you for the presentation and the information. And I also wanted to compliment you and the other departments for starting these weekly interdepartmental meetings. I'm hoping that the long-term consequence of that is everything is simpler, more standardized, and more understandable to contractors and to the public. A couple of thoughts. One, so it seems to me there's safety is number one. And then there's this, to me, I think the second priority should be ease of use. And I hope that is part of every week's conversation. How can we make it easier? How can we, I don't know if standardization is the right way to do that. And also whether whatever rules and requirements we have now, if they're keeping up with current technology, and if those weekly meetings is the place to consider that, or if you have a channel to consider updated technology and how we can accommodate that with different construction and in the city. And then I don't know if anyone's really said this, but really, I hope we're thinking that the big picture goal is electrification, electrification, electrification. However we can make that safe but easier. I hope that's always in folks' minds. And so my two questions, because it's come up a couple of times, is if the size of the PV system in particular, but maybe its storage also is too big, it may require special considerations. How often that really is a factor? It seems to me in the home environment that shouldn't be very often, but maybe I'm misguided because it sounds like there's quite a lot of power before it comes up. And also, if there's other unique building requirements that are creating sort of a drag to getting standardization for whatever it is, 70, 80, whatever the percentage of customers is.
Great, thank you. Thank you for those comments. And I'll just reflect back that yes, what we're really trying to do with our interdepartmental meetings is to align our conversations at the council and city administration level with advancing our sustainability interest and decarbonizing, and trying to get our permit process not being an impediment to a homeowner's interest to want to participate in the solution of electrifying their home and moving us forward in all those positive ways. And so part of that does mean is exactly what we're doing. We're looking at our processes. We're trying to, eliminate the things that don't add value or are not, helpful to the process. Certainly get rid of things that are not provided for in the code, because that really is the basis for our state code. Because if it's not in the state code for fire and for building, then we really shouldn't be. That's a question that we need to ask ourselves. Why are we asking for that additional requirement? And then, of course, because we are our own utility, we have a set of utility requirements that we've talked a little bit briefly about. So I'll also note, just along those lines, it's not really directly to your question, but I'm going to come back to your other parts of it, is we're making, our planning staff is also taking a look at the zoning regulations. And we want to bring forward some adjustments to zoning that will make it easier to place some of this equipment where it might otherwise encroach into a side yard or a garage or something like that. We want to really just take planning out of the review process altogether. And so we hope to be bringing some ordinances. They might be minor, but it might help somebody down the road if they've got an issue. And our checklist, which we've indicated in our staff report, is our way to standardize what we want in terms of an application coming in, what we're going to be looking for to issue a building permit. And the key, the inspection checklists are intended to provide a guide for the types of things that we're going to be looking for out in the field. And
I actually one question on that. I'm sorry to interrupt, but on
Please.
the checklist, with the decrease in time for a permit, do you think that is flowing because of the checklist? Have you had a chance to see whether that's having that impact?
no, it's not yet because we haven't published the checklist yet. These other, the reduction in time that we've had is due to our active management of these cases. We had to make some internal changes to our permitting process for how we categorize all these electrification permits together. We had to create new categories and just, back end sort of, permitting stuff. And then when we did that, we were able to run these daily reports that we mentioned in the staff report. And now we've got, not just our development center manager looking at this, but we've got managers from all the different reviewing agencies looking at it. So people know, when there's a report that's a project that's due imminently or past due. And so that's what's getting us better review times on that. We hope when we are able to push out these checklists that we'll see, to the earlier comment about, the sort of cradle to grave, flow of this, that would get reduced as well, because people will know what to file. They won't get, rejected for not having met certain requirements, and we can process those more quickly. You were asking about the size, and I may need to ask again, Mr. Hoyt, to join me on this. So what we're trying to figure out is our primary focus right now is residential. So we're working on residential checklists, and we want to make it as easy as possible to facilitate electrification for the vast majority of these systems that don't trip a larger threshold that requires a greater review. And I think right now it's George, help me out on this. Is it 15?
It's currently 10 kW, I believe.
Okay. Okay.
And utilities can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's 10 kW. And that is for the total system. So when you start adding energy storage systems, it really kind of takes it out of that category of not needing to be reviewed. And it's because utilities is looking at, is the infrastructure, the utility infrastructure capable, the transformers capable of withstanding the additional load that it could potentially see. And so it takes time for them to review and analyze that information.
So our goal then through this process is to understand that threshold, see where there might be opportunities to bump that threshold up, and so that we can capture more under this more streamlined review process. And that's part of what that's just one aspect of our coordination meetings that comes up as we again try to address these issues. But our interest is to make the vast majority of these, routine installations be processed as quickly and efficiently as possible.
Great, that's helpful. So do you have a sense of how many are routine right now versus outside of the 10 kilowatts?
Yeah, I don't have that today, but because of the way that we've set up our reporting system, that is information I can get to you. And so one takeaway to report back next time we come return to the UAC is to talk about whether we're able to push that 10 kW threshold up to a higher threshold. And I can report out to the UAC of all the permits that we've received over a certain period of time. This is how many above and below that threshold. And we should be trying to, target somewhere around 75, 80, 85% of those being the streamlined process. So that's a conversation that we're happy to have with the UAC and our fellow department representatives to see what we can do there.
Yeah, that's great. It does sound, the process right now sounds very labor intensive, and maybe as we're transitioning, that makes sense, but hopefully over time, it doesn't, it's not at that level of individual review of each applicant. So maybe the Solar App Plus can help with that. Sounds
Absolutely.
like a great opportunity.
Absolutely. And I do want to say, some of these changes, it takes a while, right? I mean, we're still an organization, and there's people, and there's a culture, and there's all these things that sort of need to change along with a change in policy and direction. So, so there are, you've received some comments through email there may be some cases out there that we can, point to and say, it's taken me 4 months to process a particular project. Many of those started before we started implementing these changes. And so if we look at a project that's come in as we've started, being more on top of, of our game on this issue, I'd be hard pressed to see that you're going to find a lot of applications that are delayed due to city time, because we are much more laserly focused on these applications, and nothing is going to get too far past a internal review deadline without a lot of people looking at this and saying, hey, what's going on? So I think we're going to see huge improvement in that area.
Was that it, Vice Chair Siegel?
Yes, thank you. Thanks for the feedback.
Let's see. Well, I have a couple questions of my own. I hate to go back to the dreaded AC disconnect, but we received quite a bit of feedback. I assume commissioners and Director Batchelor and maybe Director Late as well read the email from Don Jackson, which has a lot about the AC disconnect. And I guess I was just wondering if you could respond. I mean, a video of an explosion is certainly a visual of what happens when there is a backfeed, but I guess it doesn't address the question of why can't we use other mechanisms like the main breaker? Why don't we believe in the UL standard? And why can't the workers just test the energy on the line? Could you just address in a little bit more detail sort of why the AC disconnect is this sort of only acceptable mechanism for making sure there's no backfeed?
Dean, would you like me to take it?
Sure.
Okay. Well, thank you for that question, Chair Purcell. So we did take an opportunity to look at other disconnecting means, including pulling the meter, using the breakers, and even disconnecting at the source, the transformer, okay, when the folks are working there. But it came down to safety. That's all it was. We obviously don't want to burden our customers with additional expense, time. That's not the case. It's about safety. Looking at other options, I'll share with you. We're looking for two things. One is visible, so we could see if there's an air gap, okay, that the actual disconnect has occurred already. In a breaker, when people refer to that those are some of those things you could see in your panel, the ones you could flip, turn on and off. There's no visual that we could verify that it has actually visibly disconnected and there's an air gap. So that's why the breakers didn't work for us. And pulling the meter, as we showed in the video, is inherently dangerous activity. Okay? Those contacts that go into the socket over time, when you're pulling it, could cause those arc flash, and that's what the explosion was. So none of these options worked out. However, AC disconnect, it is by design a disconnecting means where you could actually see them. There's an air gap when you do the disconnect, and it's lockable. That was the second requirement. Sorry, I skipped that part.
So the worry, among other things, is that if the utility worker tests the energy on the line and it's de-energized, that the solar system might come online while they're working and energize the line which was previously de-energized.
So I'm sorry. Please repeat.
I guess
that.
I don't. I guess I understand. I appreciate that you can see, that you can visually inspect an AC disconnect and see the air gap. Can't you test the line to see if there's energy on the line? Or am I exposing how little I know about how this works?
So you could test the line. after the disconnect?
Well, if there are, my understanding is those who advocate against the lockable AC disconnect say that there's a piece of equipment that's UL rated that will have already done a disconnect. Is there not a way to see if that piece of equipment has successfully disconnected, to see if it's doing what it's rated to do?
If we
Okay.
were to use,
Sounds like I am in over my head trying to understand. I'm like sitting in this place where there are people who seem to be well informed on both sides of an issue, and I don't understand why there's so much disagreement about whether this piece of equipment is needed.
So Chair Fasell, if I can understand your question, I believe the only way that you'd be able to really actually take a test of that, you'd actually have to pull the meter again. You have to actually go to source side of where the source from the PV system itself is, because again, you can't test the breaker. The breaker is totally closed.
And you can't do the test at the location where the worker is about to do the work.
So the workers do test the line on the outside, but now they're working on the primary side. They do test for, if there's energy from the line itself, but at that point it could be dead, but you don't know when it's going to, if there's the potential, it's a potential now, that it could come back on when they are actually working on that line.
Right, so that's what I was asking, is if the worry is that the solar system will come back online and start energizing that line.
Right, and more now with storage, now you have storage that comes into play, where before it's just, a PV, the system could, then if somebody goes back, that energy storage now is live, it's going to then backfeed at that period of time. And what we worry about is then those folks that are working on the lines could be then backfed and then be energized then. Because they already tested it, everything's dead. And then all of a sudden now the potential is system comes on, backfeeds back into the system, energizes the lines.
Okay. And I think I heard you say that what other utilities do is they pull the meter, and that's what the video was showing, that the act of pulling the meter is not without risk.
Right, and that's their visual. That is their open visual, just as we looked at, as Tegan mentioned, there's a vacuum, it opens up, you can actually see, because now you're pulling the meter out. So there's no chance that it could backfeed back into the system.
I see. So, and then the Solar App Plus does not include this AC disconnect as part of its standard system design requirement. Do I understand that correctly?
Does not.
Yeah.
It does not.
It does not. So if it is so clearly a safety requirement, then I guess it's a bit of a mystery why a process created by NREL and the Department of Energy and all these other cities doesn't include it. But so I guess then my question is, does Solar App Plus in the design of Solar App Plus include a layer for cities and users to add their own requirements, or is that a new thing that Palo Alto is now proposing to them that they add to Solar App Plus?
There are mechanisms within Solar App Plus where we can do that. So not to get into the particulars, but let's say once Solar App Plus has deemed the application approvable from a building and fire perspective, before we issue the permit, there's fees that have to be paid. We could send an email to the applicant notifying them that an AC disconnect is required by electric utilities at a particular location. And the inspection staff would confirm that in the field. So those are the kind of particulars that I've been working out with Solar App over the last few weeks.
Got it. But it would be sort of, there would be the Solar App Plus process, and then there would be an email process on the back end that was the Palo Alto particulars.
Yes.
And then, we've talked about how in Palo Alto, we have the fire department, the building department, and the utilities department. And is Solar App Plus just intended for sort of one of those departments and then we have to add the other two?
So I'm not sure Solar Out Plus was intentionally incorporated to incorporate utilities requirements or utilities review in the aspect of it, because that is not a common practice. And this application is created for global market, not necessarily.
So it just sort of ignores the need of a utility to make sure they have the capacity or whatever.
Yes, it does not look at that.
Infrastructure
Yes,
to
that is
support
correct.
a system.
That is correct.
Have you talked, like, do they give their reasoning for that?
They don't.
In their conversations?
It's not part of their program. It's not part of their initiative. It's not anything they're interested in getting involved in. I
Okay.
have.
Okay, so what, if you can characterize what it does cover?
It covers the code requirements that are outlined in the California Electrical Code, the National Electrical Code, the National Fire Code, and the California Fire Code. Those are the aspects that it covers.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks for clarifying. I would echo Vice Chair Siegel's comments about ease of use, which I think you've heard plenty of times. Councilmember Philseth, looks like you'd like to say something.
Yeah, thanks. If you don't mind me crashing here a little bit. I was going to ask two questions, but now I have a third one, or it's more of a rumination. On the disconnect, it seems like if we decide we have to have a disconnect, then we're going to require to have people have a disconnect. But back to the ease of use thing, I mean, designing and usability is that's usually the alternative to such things. I mean, it's a switch. Right? Electricians know how to put in switches. So is there some way we can design it to be just like really, really simple to do if you follow our standard? And if you want to do some complicated custom thing, then okay, you can do that too, and it'll take a lot longer. But, I understand that some people's alternative is to pull the meter. Well, if we don't want to pull the meter, can we have a process where we put the switch right next to the meter, right? And if you don't want to put it there, then fine, you could go through some custom process. But if you want to put it there, then it takes your electrician half an hour. I mean, I don't know if that's realistic, but that seems like the way we ought to be thinking about it.
So Commissioner, so our standard right now is that switch has to be within 10 feet of that of the meter panel itself. So
Okay.
the standard is already set for that. And Director Lath was talking a little bit about. So one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to put together some drawings so that we would attach to the package that when an applicant comes in, and it would actually show that disconnect being within somewhere around within that 10 feet mark. If we have, and we have done this in the past, if it makes totally sense that it's going to be 20 feet away, we've given an exemption, but then the panel itself has to have some type of sticker mechanism that says disconnects 20 feet, 30 feet, whatever it is, or maybe it's around the backyard side. So that standard's already set. It's already in the rules. And again, we're trying to put some templates together to make it easier for folks that would want to pull a permit. So it's easy to see.
Okay. All right, thanks. And then, so the two questions I really wanted to ask, one was, I looked in the staff report and did I read this right? That the pre-application process typically takes 2 weeks, which is a process of determining if an applicant has submitted all their paperwork and paid their fees. Did I read that right?
Thank you for raising that question. And as the author of the report, I was fighting an internal struggle about whether I put this in or not. And I thought, let's just err on the side of transparency. And
yeah, no good deed goes unpunished, huh? That's
fine. But I think there is it's important to understand. It does seem like a long time, but it's what it reflects is we're in a place now because of the pandemic and the remote work, we had to create this pre-application process to allow people at their leisure to submit an application into our system and go through a process of, making sure all the paperwork is uploaded and fees paid before we can accept it and route it to ourselves and our colleagues who are reviewing these things. This is a process that we never tracked before because it never existed before. But in actuality, it happened frequently at the counter. People would come in without an appointment and they'd talk to our staff and they'd say, hey, I want to do this. And they'd get some information. They'd go back a couple of days later, they'd come back and get some more information. And then, it's an iterative process that we never tracked before because it was, this informal process. But now because we have a data point, it's something that we can track. And it alarmed me as well. And I've had a number of conversations with our staff, like, how is this possible? How is it take this long, to go from a pre-submittal to an actual building permit? And the vast majority of it really depends on the quality of the submission, how familiar somebody is with that system, and that determines and how responsive they are to get us information back. This includes city and applicant time in processing. So it's an alarming number, but I would say we're not getting the complaints at this stage because of that process, right? It's part of the process of submitting and getting it ready for building permit submission. And I want to keep tracking it to see if we can bring it down further, but it's almost like there's not a lot that we have control over that process, except for making it easier and clear for what we need upon submittal and quickly reviewing them. And for the most part, we're doing a pretty quick job of turning around the city response to that.
It does seem like kind of an opportunity for a checklist and some white space reduction.
Not only that, the other piece, so definitely we're working on that with the checklist. And there's a couple other things. One is we have a certain type of, there are some users who are very sophisticated and know the system, and they're in and out, and their project is pre-application submitted and it's converted to a building permit the next day, no problem. But not everybody uses our system frequently or has that same familiarity. So there's a couple of things that we've been talking about, including as recently as today, is do we want for our customers who are not as familiar with our system to be able to just upload a set of plans and have it sit with the city to go through this process? Or do we want to have that first contact be a virtual meeting or an in-person meeting, which we do offer now, so that we're having that touch point and walking them through the system to shorten that time? That's one thing that we're exploring. The other is just our website. There's so much more I think we can do on our website to make it clear about here's what we need for your submittal, and just less words and more graphics and more to the point, using our website to help facilitate that process as well. So we'll keep tracking it. Like I said, we get a number of complaints about a variety of things. And in the beginning of the pandemic, we got a ton of complaints, and justifiably so, about our submittal process, because you may recall this bookmarking issue where the plans had to be labeled in such a way. Well, we got rid of that, and that got rid of a lot of the complaints. We're not perfect yet by a long shot, but we're definitely making progress in this area.
Okay, all right. I'm sure it's not an exact parallel, but there's lots of experience in other domains that, making sure the data is scrubbed before you give it to the algorithm saves massive amounts of effort and time.
True. And I think it's a very appropriate analogy. And it's one that we're trying our best to figure out, how do we best serve our customer? Do we take a little bit more time in this part to give them the ease of being able to submit whenever they want? Or do we force them into an appointment system to make sure that when they submit it, we've got everything that we need, and then the turnaround time is short? At the end of the day, I'm less concerned about the number and more interested in the quality of the service that the applicant is receiving. If they're feeling satisfied of the process, then that speaks volumes, because it could just be an iterative process. It could be a complex case. It could be any number of things that prevents somebody from finishing through the process. But if they feel that they've been served and processed in a timely way, that's what we're trying to get. Which reminds me, as noted in our report, we want to do these feedback loops too. So we're finishing up our surveys, and we'll have a chance to work with our customers to get a lot more data than we have now about that quality, that experience, and go beyond the numbers.
Understand. Okay. And then the other question I would ask, the thing that jumped out at me was, I noticed that there's 3 different city departments that need to be involved in the review and inspection process. And, you know, it sort of feels like something that might be driven by the way we organize ourselves as opposed to the needs of the problem that's being done. And I was just curious, you know, do we have a lot of fires from solar installation?
I'm going to refer to Chief Lindsay, who's joining us here on short notice. Mr. Lindsay, do you have can you respond to that?
Yeah, good evening, Council Member Filseth, and thank you for that question. I can't give you specific data on fire related to solar or ESS off the top of my head, but I can tell you that the code allows for provisions for setbacks, and that's one of the things that we look for fire engine and fire truck access when it comes to ventilation jobs. So when we have smoke inside of a building, we have this thing called flow path, and we have to cut holes in roofs to remove superheated gas from the building to make it tenable. And the code has provisions for setbacks to make sure that we have pathways and such. So that's one of the things that we look for. But to speak directly to the fires itself, I'd have to get back to you on that.
I can't remember ever hearing of a fire caused by a solar installation in Palo Alto, but maybe there are. I guess the question I'm wondering is not so much of, you know, does the code need to consider all these circumstances, but you know, you look at this thing, you know, we need 3 different departments to go inspect this thing. You go, well, you know, could that be done with 2, right? Right, and you have a right and so forth, because the organizational load for coordination load, right? You know, has got to add some complexity to the process. And so that's really my question is that, you know, does it really take 3 different city departments to do this, or, you know, could some of these, you know, some of these functions be handled in, all these functions be handled in 2 departments instead of 3, and then that would sort of, you know, reduce the organizational overhead.
Yeah, I think that's
Thanks.
a great point for that. And that's one thing that we looked at is streamlining the process for the 10 kVA. And that's the first step that we've taken as collaborators in this process with both building and utilities with streamlining the process. And so that's where we have one inspector going out to do that job.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Yeah, I just to follow along on that, I want to thank Chief Lindsay and you know, folks from our other departments as well. You know, we agree that trying to minimize the number of inspectors at a site was an important aspect, and so as the chief noted, we are able to consolidate that for some of our permits, but it's really a size threshold, and at some point, you know, departments have an interest in being you know, looking for their particular, you know, expertise in those areas. But we have done some cross training, but we're also finding out that universe, we're trying to find out if the universe that is served by that cross training and consolidating inspections is large enough to put the energy into it, right? I mean, we don't want anybody to wait longer than they need to for an inspection, but we're trying to tackle a lot of things here too. And so we're trying to prioritize how we organize ourselves. But your point is well taken, and one that all of us have been working on to figure out how we can consolidate it, our reviews.
Councilmember Filseth, was that it for you?
Yeah, I'm done. Thanks, sir.
I have one follow-up question just on Solar App Plus. That not talking about the AC disconnect. Are there other additional sort of only in Palo Alto requirements that we are looking to add as part of the city adopting Solar App Plus? Or would it just be that disconnect?
So I'll let George come in, and as he's coming on screen here, you know, I just want to reiterate that we're kind of in the early days here. I think we started our conversations about a month ago.
Sorry, yeah, that was presumptuous. Are there other things that are part of the discussion to potentially add in a potential adoption of Solar App Plus?
Well, I appreciate the question. Thank you. I would say the interconnection agreement is one, the utility interconnection agreement, and getting that signed is one of those processes that we are trying to integrate with Solar App Plus. That is kind of, out of their envelope. Another one is obviously a utility review based on the size, or an additional fire review that may be based on the size of the system that is required. And if there's an exterior component where planning would get involved based on being the equipment sitting in a setback or some other type of that type of review. I can't think of any technical additions to what Solar App looks at that we would have to outside of the AC disconnect. It's more of a review process that would take place.
And George, if I and I'm learning, about this as well as we go along, but it sounds like the Solar App Plus takes the state standards and it tries to facilitate that. And so where we have local zoning standards that may impede that, that's what we're looking at now to get rid of those zoning impediments. And in collaboration with fire and utilities, we're trying to find out, where are there barriers that would limit our maximizing our use of Solar App Plus. And that's a conversation that we're beginning to have, so that we can maybe take a step back and say, well, gosh, do we need to, can we increase our review beyond 10 kW? And if so, what does that mean down the line? And might more projects fit into this Solar App, qualify for Solar App Plus? It's a small universe right now, and we want to look to expand in that as much as possible. But it's a conversation, and like I said, we're just now starting it, but we're super motivated and excited to see how we can maximize that application. Is that fair, George?
It's very fair, and I totally agree. I mean, we're starting those conversations, and we will continue to have them.
Yeah, when we met in April, I mean, there certainly was a lot of discussion of only in Palo Alto requirements, and some desire from the commission or interest in, perhaps getting rid of some of the only in Palo Alto requirements if they were not necessary. And what I'm hearing is that, and I think some of the enthusiasm for Solar App Plus was that just adopting it as is sort of be part and parcel of saying, you know what, we're just going to do whatever the state and national, regulations require. So it's neither good nor bad. I'm just observing that what is that we are not looking at Solar App Plus as a way of stripping off anything specific to Palo Alto. We're looking at Solar App Plus potentially as a mechanism for sort of streamlining the process, but not as changing any of the requirements for systems.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, Solar App isn't intended to strip requirements necessarily. And, I've also heard this Palo Alto specific requirements. Nobody else does this. But going through this since April and taking a deep dive into these and looking at these checklists and looking at these requirements, I don't come to an agreement, anything technical that we are doing that is not state or federal code. State or local ordinance code.
Okay.
So the AC disconnect is the only thing that really comes to my mind. And yes, there may have been some inspection practices that we were maybe being a little overzealous on, that we have curtailed back on to help simplify the process. And maybe those were perceived as Palo Alto specific. But those efforts have been underway for the last few months, and I think have been very successful.
Okay, actually, I'm glad you're clarifying, because when I was asking about like the things that would be added, and you listed utility review and fire review and exterior review, I sounds like I misinterpreted that to mean sort of adding layers of things that just Palo Alto requires. But what I'm hearing you say is that's just that the Solar App Plus doesn't include those things, but what we're adding is just to adhere to state standards.
Yes, that is correct.
Gotcha.
And-
Okay,
and
thanks for
George,
clarifying.
So maybe just another point of clarification. So so Chair Forcell, on the state mandated requirements, we anticipate being fully aligned with that. It also highlights an opportunity for us to identify where we may have some other standards that are not building or electrical or fire related, such as the zoning. And so we're looking at that, and that may expose areas where we need to change our code. And so that's part of our parallel process as well.
Right.
It may not be ready on day one, but we're looking at streamlining that. But George, maybe a question for you, or as part of this conversation is, in addition to just getting the standards, we also have to get to a organizational comfort level almost of what we're willing to, we've reviewed things when they were at a certain threshold before. Are we having to ask ourselves that, do we have to raise our bar, our threshold for when we might, the fire reviews, for instance, that you were talking about? I mean, if we're able to get to a place where we can recognize what that standard is and then change what our threshold is for what that review is, more projects would qualify under the app. Is that fair?
Yeah, my understanding is currently the app qualifies for almost like 50 kW for solar systems. They don't have quite a threshold developed yet for the battery storage systems because they are still developing and piloting a lot of the battery storage system review aspect of it. So they didn't give me an update on that. So, obviously, yes, we do need to ask ourselves as a city, can we push these thresholds to get to that 40, I think it's like 47.5 kilowatts that Solar App could support. And that is definitely a goal in my book and in our other departments, I believe, is to see what we can do.
And so for many jurisdictions that don't have their own utility, that they're not having to figure that piece out, right? Because they just, the contractor or the homeowner has to work with PG&E separately outside of the city process. But because we're the permitting agency across the board, we need to think about those other considerations. And so we know that we have some of our requirements, and you can call them Palo Alto specific because there's only one Palo Alto utility, and that may differ from PG&E. But as you heard this evening, the AC disconnect, our staff feels pretty strongly for safety reasons that's not an area where we're willing to budge on that. So the question gets back to this ease of use issue. If that's going to be our requirement, how do we make it crystal clear that that's our requirement and this is how you comply with it? And here's some examples of how you can do that. George also noted about the inspection process, and I love his description because he said it a couple of times, and so I feel comfortable repeating it. I think we need to own this. I mean, we were overzealous in some of our inspection processes before, and that's where we get a lot of criticism. I got a lot of criticism about our process. But what I hope is that people who engage with us now, people who engage with us now will see that things are different, and allow us to sort of hit the reset button and give us a chance to show that we have made some changes. Does that mean that every inspection is going to be smooth or there's not going to be some issues? No, but we're trying to be really clear about what the things are that we need to inspect. And that's another area where Palo Alto may be a little different from other jurisdictions. And that's an area that comes back to the benchmarking conversation. And I was talking with George about earlier today was, how do we know what other cities are doing in their inspection process? And can we get some data on that? Because the codes themselves are a baseline, a floor of the minimum basic safety standards. And we're not even able to inspect all of those. So we take a subset of those that we inspect out in the field. And Palo Alto, how Palo Alto compares to other jurisdictions is something that I think is worth us exploring. But I don't know, just because another jurisdiction may not be as looking at all of the codes, I don't know, that we want to align ourselves to the lowest common denominator on inspections. We want to have safe systems and we want to be efficient, but we also want to make sure that we're doing our part and making sure that everything has been done properly. So that's an area where I think it's an ongoing conversation between our managers and our inspectors and our customers to really find that line where we inspect, and when we leave a site, we feel confident that it meets the basic minimum standards of the code. And I think that's another area where some other jurisdictions may not be doing as much inspections. Does that make Palo Alto right or wrong, or the other jurisdiction right or wrong? I think it's a resource issue. And I think these are things that we still need to examine as we go forward.
Duly noted. Thank you for that. We didn't really talk about inspection, which I think is fair because this is a discussion of permit processes and not inspection processes, but I appreciate your comments nonetheless. And honestly, all of you, I appreciate you, all the staff members who are not utilities regulars for coming this evening and helping us understand this issue. As you know, there's a lot of community interest, and so it's an educational process for us on the commission. And I appreciate you being patient with our lines of questioning. If there aren't any other commissioners, I suggest that we move on. So thanks again, Director Late. Thanks again, George Hoyt, Stephen Lindsay, and everybody else. And let's see, 6:30. I think that we will go to our second agenda item and then take our short break after our second agenda item, which is a discussion of the legal framework for construction work hours and street closures. And so we'll start by asking if there are any members of the public who want to comment on this.
Yeah, if anyone from the public have any comments regarding this item, please raise your hand. There are no hands raised.
All right. Is there a staff presentation or opening remarks?
Yeah, I'm Eileen Belier from the City Attorney's Office, and I'll be giving you the legal overview this evening. So it should be brief. I'm going to run through the regulations that we have in the city's municipal code about noise, and then the city's permit process that also impacts some traffic and street closure regulations. There are some exceptions to all of these, and then I know there were some questions from members of the commission that we received sort of late, so I'll partially address those and then see if you have any follow-up for staff. And there is not a presentation tonight because the materials I'm going through are the city's own documents, so I'm happy to share those as I go along. If I can figure out how to share my screen. Here we go. So I'm going to start off in the city's municipal code, noise ordinance, because let's see. All right, is everyone seeing the municipal code?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the primary source of the city's construction noise limits, which we do have hours set. The way this is structured in the code is a policy declaration, some definitions, a general limit on residential and commercial property noise. So from an ambient level, you're not supposed to go over 6 decibels in a residential area or 8 decibels in a commercial area. And then it's followed by special provisions that are sort of exceptions, and they cover things like construction, which is in subsection B of 9.10.60. So the general rule on construction is right there. Noise from construction is prohibited except between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. Saturday, as long as it meets the standards that it's not exceeding these noise thresholds that follow. So that's our overview. It applies both in non-residential and residential areas, although there's separate signage blocks that follow here in the code. It applies to other equipment, residential power equipment, there's some slight variations on when you can use power equipment that isn't strictly construction. In subsection E, there's a provision specific to leaf blowers. And then down at the bottom, there is the exception permits that I wanted to go over. So in any case, if you as an applicant want to make a showing to the city that you've investigated all your options for abating noise to these levels and you can't meet that standard, and you have good cause for the construction noise that you need to make, the city is authorized to approve an exception permit in some cases. But that's going to be case by case, and it goes through approval as shown in this section. All right, I'm going to stop sharing that one. The next part that complicates that very basic 8 to 6 on a weekday, 9 to 6 on Saturday rule is if your project involves the public rights of way, and then you need a traffic control plan to go with your street work and construction permit. So those all come from Public Works Engineering and the city's transportation department, who review those plans as part of an application for a permit. And I will pull up their web pages to make that more clear for everyone. One second, multiple tabs, not bringing up the right page. Is this showing engineering services for everyone?
Yes.
Okay. This is the city's Public Works Engineering Services page. The forms and permits that you have to submit to the city when you apply for a private development project. And then down here under Public Works Plan Review Documents, there's this logistics plan preparation guidelines that I'm going to open. Because this, and let me make it a little bigger. This covers, I think, some of the complexity that can come up in a construction project. So if you have a large or complex site, if you're in a commercial area, if you're in a residential subdivision and not just a single house, you're more likely to have traffic impacts in the right of way. And so these are the additional requirements that you need to look through, see how they apply to the project, submit to the city. The city reviews those, and that plan becomes part of the permit. So here we have the city's standard working hours, and then the additional restrictions. And I think this is where some of the, maybe what sounds like Palo Alto specific rules come from, where we restrict business district traffic, that there's a 4 p.m. cutoff. And that's to, allow people to use the business districts after work hours without being blocked by construction. If you're an arterial or collector street, and these are the main thoroughfares of the city, that's a lot of commute traffic, the city prohibits construction work that would block those between the commute hours of 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. or 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Work can be impacted by special events. So that could be local, it could be Stanford. And then near schools, we have a restriction that you have to start after the school day. And there could be other special restrictions if it's a heavily used, say, railroad crossing, or as deemed necessary for student safety. So these are sort of the framework that the city applies to every project, but how it will apply in any given case, there's some flexibility to staff to apply the policy and make the best call. So it's not a black and white cutoff. It's going to be project specific, case by case. And again, because of that, there could be flexibility depending on the project, that certain projects are important enough for urgent repair work that we allow exceptions to these. These are just going to be the standard set of restrictions that limit people. All right. I did also want to note that some of these principles that you see in the permit review restrictions are tied to policies that the City Council has adopted in its comprehensive plan. So I don't want to get into too much detail, but there are some specific noise and transit policies that our council adopted that I think are guiding principles behind these. And then finally, to the questions from commissioners. There was one about whether there are different time limits depending on the type of project. And as you can see from this, it's not based on the project as much as where the project is located. So depending on what district you're in, depending on what streets are impacted by your work, that's going to be what hours the city is going to authorize you to do construction. And there was another question about how this compared to local jurisdictions nearby. And I only had a minute to look at that because it did come in yesterday. I was able to pull the noise ordinance for Mountain View and Menlo Park just to see what their hours were in comparison. It's pretty comparable. They also set a standard rule. So in Mountain View, it's 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., but only Monday through Friday, no Saturday, Sunday, or holidays. And in Menlo Park, it is 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. like Palo Alto. No weekends or holidays for commercial construction, but if you are a resident or property owner undertaking your own construction, you're allowed to work weekend hours, 9 to 5. So there's minor differences. I think if anyone on the commission is interested in more of that analysis or the deeper dive into how those other jurisdictions do transit planning, that would be something to direct staff to return with. And I will stop sharing and see if there are any questions.
Yeah, thank you for that. Commissioners, Vice Chair Siegel.
Thank you for that. As I recall, the biggest concern, I mean, I guess noise is sort of the outer limits of when work can be done, but the bigger concern was that with the traffic closure prohibitions or the restrictions, that you have a 9 to 4 workday plus a lunch break. And so it ends up being a really short workday, which ends up causing projects to go longer and be more expensive. And so I don't know if it's something where there should be more exceptions or it's something City Council should be considering. But if our maintenance and of our utilities is expensive because we have these road closure limitations, I just think it might be something to consider, or maybe consider more exceptions for certain projects.
Commissioner Bowie.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. I was wondering if you had any more information on the sets of case-by-case exceptions that might exist already within this. Just sort of thinking about some of the projects, like the undergrounding work that we discussed at our main meeting. And there's a degree of urgency that may be associated with some projects that are going on. And so I'm just wondering if that has any impact or if there are case-by-case exceptions on that front.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I will say my role was to do the legal overview, and as far as how staff applies any of these exceptions, I think that would need to be directed to staff. What I did hear when I conversed with transportation planning staff, though, was they have an interest in not granting exceptions that might be precedential. So it's, if you start an exception and it's just for a regular homeowner, then every homeowner is going to want the same exception. I think there could be a case made for a utility project being unique and urgent. So if there's a specific question that you'd like to direct to transportation planning staff, I'm happy to note that.
I could say, Commissioner Bowie, that just recently, probably within the last week, electric utilities needed to get a couple permits, one from Caltrans and then also one from the city. And this was, we needed to replace some conductors that went over El Camino. And the permit timeline from Caltrans was, the ask was to do that work later in the evening, okay, because of the traffic, because we were going to have to shut down El Camino for a short period of time by the time that we were able to raise the wire up above the ground line. So the street was actually closed for about 20 minutes. They asked us to do that at a later period of time. We went to the city, explained their situation, and they granted us that timeline. So there are times where we have gone for these exceptions, but our typical work that we typically do from the water, gas, wastewater, where we're opening up streets or we're boring streets to replace infrastructure, we typically try to follow these guidelines with that. Now, again, in some of these underground thoroughfares, major thoroughfares, we will try to do that work maybe a little later in the evening. And we've been granted those exceptions when they come about, but it is an exception though.
That makes sense, and thank you for that answer.
Are there any other commissioners? Councilmember Philseth? Additional questions? I honestly don't remember exactly in which context this came up. Was it when was it part of electrification permitting, the conversation we were just having, or was it when we were talking to Magellan about fiber, or was it when we were talking about undergrounding?
I think it was fiber to the home. That's what
Okay.
the feedback Magellan got from the construction crews or contractors when they went to get some quotes.
This came from actually Commissioner Smith during that period of conversation. Unfortunately, he wasn't here tonight.
Right.
But that's where, as Dave just mentioned, it came from the Magellan conversation about if we were able to move forward with fiber to the home, would we be able to expand the work hours? So, because again, as you just mentioned, it lengthens the project, the timelines go out a little bit further, and it may deterrent maybe a construction firm actually bidding on the job because of these restrictions.
Because a lot of the work is on an arterial or collector street or in a business district or close to a school. Like when you add all of those restricted zones up, it ends up covering a lot of the pathways of the project. I see. Councilmember Philseth, I saw your hand go up briefly.
I was just going to say it's probably something more for council to worry about than sort of the saddle on the Utilities Advisory Commission. I understand the connection now, though.
All right, well, if there's no further discussion, thank you for coming back with that information. I guess we can conclude we understand better, but to Councilmember Philseth's point, I'm not sure what we will do with it other than to just know that this is an issue as we continue to get updates in the future from Magellan.
Thank you.
And so with that, why don't we go ahead and take a short recess? By my clock, it is 6:44 p.m. Why don't we come back at 7 and finish up our last item? See you all shortly. Our next and last item of new business is a discussion of an action item actually around the design guidelines for the 2022 cost of service analysis. And so I will first ask if there are any members of the public that want to address the commission on this topic.
If anyone from the public would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand. No hand is raised.
All righty then. Is there a staff report or presentation on this?
This is Eric Keniston, a senior resource planner. There's not a staff presentation. I was just going to put up the attachment A, which shows the proposed design guidelines. So I could put that up on the screen if you'd like.
Okay. Do you have remarks that you'd like to make along with it?
I will be, yes, I have a spiel, so.
Okay, very good. In other words, we shouldn't launch into questions as soon as the screen is up.
I have some opening remarks if that's okay, or.
Please go ahead.
All right. So good evening, Commissioners. Eric Keniston, Senior Resource Planner. So tonight we're bringing to you the design guidelines for our planned electric cost of service analysis, or COSA, and rate design update. It's been a little bit more than, I think, 5 years now since we last did our cost of service study. And as we're looking to introduce some new or upcoming rate offerings in the coming year or two, we feel it's best to update the COSA as well. Now, when we do a COSA, we try to give the UAC and Council opportunity to provide guidance and express areas of interest and study early on. That way we can better guide the consultants on where to focus their attention. This meeting is your chance to give us that policy guidance. And that's because once the cost of service study is done, we try not to make changes. This can be frustrating for policymakers because sometimes the rates resulting from the COSA aren't exactly what they want them to be. And governing boards at other agencies have gotten in trouble and created certain legal issues for themselves by trying to adopt rates that don't align with their published cost of service study. So we try to minimize that frustration by getting your policy guidance upfront and early. And when we find areas where there's some flexibility in the COSA, we can make sure the final product aligns with your policy guidance as much as possible. So because there's several items we want to look at and investigate, and given the just time constraints, it's likely this project is going to be broken up over 2 years. Our first and foremost goal will be to update the existing rates as they are and incorporate any rate design changes that are inseparable from that base COSA. And then we follow up with COSA amendments for new rate designs like DC fast charger rates or data center rates, all electric rates, microgrid rates, although some of these might need to go earlier than others. And that's those topics, and finding out what you consider to be higher priority, it will help drive our decisions about what new designs we prioritize. Now, to start, we've developed the guidelines as I have up on the screen. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but I'm going to talk about item number 1. First and foremost, rates must be based on the cost of providing service. It's a bedrock principle, first guideline every time. Cost and rates must be allocated based on the cost to serve their respective groups. And there are sometimes multiple ways that certain costs can be classified and allocated. And that, in conjunction with policy recommendations, can help guide the final COSA recommendation. But in all cases, we want as fair and legally defensible a document and set of rates as that we can produce. So within a cost-based rate structure, we'll keep an eye towards fairness and equity, especially with respect to low-income customers. But we also want to avoid unnecessary rate design barriers to electrification, EV charging, solar, storage, while simultaneously avoiding subsidies between customer groups. So we dance a fine line there. And we want to prepare for the transition to time varying rather than tiered rates, which is kind of where most rates, I think, in California, if not the United States, are heading towards. So the work plan we have for the COSA right now, and it's embedded within the report, we want to look at all electric household rates and or EV charging rates for homeowners, separate DC fast charger rates for multi-vehicle charging areas. We want to evaluate the minimum versus fixed charge that are out there, rates for data center customers, rates for possible microgrid customers, looking at updating our existing standby charges, and of course, time of use rates. We do have time of use rates in existence for our large commercial customers. They have that metering, but we also want to develop the pilot options for when AMI becomes available for residential and small commercial customers as well. But really, because this is more of a forum for you to provide input, I'd like to kind of stop there and listen to what you have to say. Of course, I have to say one last thing. After we went to print with this, we decided that we want to take this item to the Finance Committee as well as Council. So the recommendation won't be for UAC to recommend to Council, will be UAC to recommend to Finance Committee, recommends to Council. It's a Picayune point, but I must bring it up. So with that, I will be quiet, and I'm here to listen to what you have to say.
Thank you very much for that. Commissioners, who has questions or comments? Vice Chair Siegel. And then Commissioner Johnston.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I guess I think your priorities mostly do make sense. I guess I had one question, whether there could be a rate for flex alerts or other sort of strain on the system times where there would be a rate that could be incorporated there. And then, yeah, just to reiterate, the 3 and 4, to not create any unnecessary barriers.
Yeah, I think it sounds like what you're almost talking about is like a critical peak pricing rate. So when there's very heavy demand periods that we might be able to put out that extra. You see it in some places. PG&E has it. It's during periods of heavy constraint, the prices really shoot up, and we will send out a blast to everyone who's on that rate saying, "Conserve now." There's possibility of producing that kind of rate. Yeah, we can look at that.
Commissioner Johnston?
Thank you. A couple of questions just kind of about the mechanics. You said it had been 5 years since we last did a COSA for the electric rates. Is there guidelines for how often we should be doing a COSA?
We like to update them, get new ones right between 5 to 10 years, and because especially when we are going about adding new rate products, if we're just kind of updating existing and not adding anything new, we can go a little bit longer. But because we want to add possibly several new rate schedules to the mix, possibly break out new customer groups, we would feel it's meet to update the whole COSA.
I think that's actually may answer my next question as well, which is, I mean, we're obviously in a period where there's kind of great potential changes to electric customers and the use of electricity within the city, and I know we want to encourage electrification, we want to encourage EV charging, we want to encourage on-site generation and storage. I think we want to encourage time of use rates. I take it the purpose of the COSA is to allow great flexibility in those areas, so that between when we do this COSA and the next one, we would have the flexibility to adopt new rates for all electric homes, for EV charging, for time of use rates and so on. We'd have the flexibility to adopt those rates. Is that right?
It gives us flexibility. It also makes sure that we are properly allocating the costs that we have on the existing grid to the right customers. So we want to make sure that if we have growing customer segments and shrinking customer segments, that we properly allocate the distribution costs to those customers who are creating greater strain on the system, and get those charges out, get those costs sliced out right, and then we can develop the best rate products for that circumstance.
So the part of what the COSA will do is, as you just said, kind of allocate the cost between various groups of customers. And it sounds like that would include customer groups that may change significantly in size between now and the next COSA.
Exactly. I mean, between over 5 years, we might have seen some shifts in how different customer groups use electricity in the city. If we are looking at breaking out new rate groups, seeing how they, are they really significantly different from our the pool that they might already be in? If they're brand new types of customers, say for instance, like data centers or microgrids, would we, how can we best design a product that doesn't over incentivize or over incentivize certain aspects of the system, or create, again, does not create a situation where other folks are subsidizing them or that they are subsidizing others. And that's how we need to look at that interplay with COSA. So it better allows us to, yeah.
Go ahead.
I was saying what it does is it better allows us to know what cost elements should best be collected from what parts of the system we have. I guess that's the, yeah.
So that sounds good to me, because my main concern here is that we design the study in a way that would give us flexibility to be able to generate rates that would, to the extent feasible within the cost limitations, that would encourage, as you say, these new building electrification, EV charging, so on, all of the things that we want to do to achieve our goals with the electrical system. We need flexibility in the rates.
Yeah, and COSA will tell us, sort of gives us the guidance on how much flexibility we will have.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Commissioner Metz and then Commissioner Bowie.
Thank you, Chair. Eric, I had a couple of questions. One is regarding COSA number 1, rates based on cost of service. How do we incorporate the environmental burden, the costs that we incur, for the various user class in achieving our environmental goals, buying racks and so on. I looked through the financial plan for the utility and for the city, and I couldn't figure out how we incorporate that into our costs. How do we do? How is that built into this?
Yeah, so environmental costs are if there are actual costs that we incur as running an electric utility or in going out and buying power, those are real tangible costs that we have no problem going out and we can turn those and allocate those out. In a lot of cases, some of those are almost commodity related, so that we can pass them one for one back to customers. But then there's, I don't know if you're also talking about some of the more certain environmental costs. Yeah.
We buy racks.
Certain other. Exactly. And that that's fairly easy, that we can turn around and pass those costs back to customers through our commodity rates. Then there's other environmental factors that sometimes folks want to bring up that are the social environmental costs that don't necessarily have dollar amounts tied to them. Unless they're tangible costs that we pay, I can't necessarily put those out in rates, even though that would be lovely. I think in a perfect world, that's also not I don't think allowable under today's world. So
something like a rec where we're actually writing a check,
yes,
that would show up in the commodity cost, and that would be in the P&L of Palo Alto Utilities.
Yes, yes, it is.
Right, okay. Then second question, same topic, rate based on cost of service. Is there, a possibility of working into this, different tiers of quality of electric service? There's been some discussion with, some of the city council members about, having a more higher resilience tier of service than, basic service, and that perhaps people would pay a premium for that. Is that, obviously would cost more, and hopefully we'd recover that. Is that envisioned in this, or a possibility in this?
It's something that I can bring up with the consultants, and we can talk about internally and see if there's justification for it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I would appreciate that.
Yeah.
On number 3, which the barriers to vehicle electrification, I sort of felt this one was kind of, I mean, I have an EV, I'm in favor of vehicle electrification, but I sort of felt that this guideline was kind of trying to duck reality, which is that, these charging stations really do use large amounts of energy for small amounts of time, and therefore could have a big impact on demand, and, seems like should pay a demand charge. Shouldn't we be more looking at, how to reduce the demand than trying to paper over it. And, wouldn't we be subsidizing them if we don't make them pay for the demand that they require?
Well, that's the fine line. You can't be subsidizing the demand. Is there a way that we could charge the system the average cost for that class in a temporary basis? So what some other utilities have done is on a short-term basis, and on the upfront, they'll charge them a mostly kWh rate. And I don't know if I'm getting ahead. So yeah, DC fast charger stations sometimes use a heavy amount of kW demand and a relatively small amount of kWh.
Right. So shouldn't they pay for that, for the demand? Oops.
I think Mr. Keniston might have frozen.
Yeah, I can jump in. Commissioner, I think one of the challenges that.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Jonathan.
Sorry, can people hear me? Oh.
And Mr. Keniston is back.
No, I'm kind of saying, shouldn't we look at Mr. Habdenschein joined, but shouldn't we be addressing the technical reality? Like maybe they need to have storage or something like that rather than, trying to duck it.
I wasn't aware that I had dropped off. I'm terribly sorry about that. Yeah, we'll look at seeing if there's ways that we can create rates that for them that encourage them to have a better load factor because we know, like I don't know if you heard the goal, of course, is to get higher utilization of these types of facilities, more cars using the fast chargers, and therefore get their load factor better. Better utilization of kW to kWh in proportion. But yeah, I think in the short term, though, when we understand that they might not, while it's still trying to be a growth group, that perhaps what other agencies have done is to have like a phased plan where there's more kWh charged to start and then slowly transitioning to a more standard, like we would an E4 or E7 rate that we have for all other customers. So there's things that we'll look at. It might not be feasible. We might find that it's something that we can't reasonably do, but it's something that we'd like to investigate.
Yeah, I want to just emphasize that point, that it's possible for us to create a situation where in order to pay the cost of running the installation, the charging station owner ends up having to charge so much for the EV charging that we create the situation that we're trying to avoid. In other words, they're having to pass through all of these, a significant amount of cost on a per kilowatt hour basis, and people choose not to use that charging station, and we can't fix the problem that we have where they're using a lot of energy for a very short period of time, but there isn't a lot of utilization of the charging station to increase the amount of kilowatt hours that those costs are spread over. And so we need some creative thinking around that. This is a kind of problem that afflicts not just EV chargers, but we've seen it with gas power plants as well, in the way that gas was charged a few years back to gas power plants that kept them from running at an economically efficient level. So PG&E restructured their rates a little bit, and those plants were operating the way that the grid needed them to operate, instead of receiving artificial disincentives in the way the rates were structured. So that's all we're trying to avoid.
Okay. I thought also in number 4, there was almost kind of the opposite problem, that there was a comment sort of on the bottom page 4, the top of page 5, it says something like prevent these systems from offsetting or bypassing charges collected currently via demand or consumption charges. Isn't that what we really want people to do, though? I mean, don't we want people to store energy so that they don't consume electricity during peak demand periods? Isn't that kind of the whole point of what we're trying to do through distributed generation and demand management? it seemed like that's the opposite of what we want. We really want to get people, to address duck curve and all that about renewable generation, that we want people to consume electricity during those periods and not consume it at peak times.
We definitely want to go in and
yeah, this just seems directionally going in the wrong direction to me.
well, I think we want to encourage the use of these technologies. We want to encourage people coming in, but we don't want to have rates that over incentivize or you don't want to either, you both do not want to over incentivize and make a rate such that it makes it economically over advantageous for people to go out and do it at the expense of the distribution system in general. And similarly, you don't want to disincentivize it through and penalize people for going out and buying these products. So like I said, you're dancing a little bit of a razor's edge when you start designing these products, but that's what we attempt to do. So
yeah, I think I would, the word demand, particularly in this one, I think is wrong. I think we do want to incent people to lower demand. I could, you could debate the consumption charge part of it, but I think if people lower demand, particularly at peak times, we want to incent that and not discourage that. And the other thing to consider is I think we don't have a ratchet or demand charges, right?
no, we do not.
So, that might be another thing to think about to make sure the utility is whole. But I think this is directionally wrong to, try to discourage people from reducing demand.
Okay. Noted. Thank you.
Sorry, Commissioner, can you, I lost track, I lost the thread at some point. Can you point again to the section that you were referring to here?
Yeah, it's guideline number 4 at the bottom of page 4 and the first couple lines on page 5. It said rates need to be designed to prevent these systems from offsetting or bypassing charges collected currently via demand or consumption charges, which has a potential to shift costs to other customers. And I would say if somebody designs a system to reduce demand, they are entitled to the savings. And they're doing everybody else a favor.
Yes. So I think what's okay. So I think what's one of the subtleties that might be getting lost in this sentence is the difference between collections related to our distribution system versus collections related to demand impacts on the state grid as a whole. So we do want to create incentives for people to reduce demand on the overall CalISO grid. We do also want to provide incentives for people to reduce distribution demand as well. But there's a difference both in the time periods when we need people to do this. So what's complicated about Palo Alto's system, when you look at a system like SMUD's, for example, their distribution peaks occur at the same time as the grid overall peaks in the evening. But in Palo Alto, because we have a different climate and a different customer mix, our demand ends up peaking in the middle of the day, right when all that solar is on the system. And so, yeah, the way that the rate designs end up coming out can create the wrong incentives, and it can create underfunding for our distribution system. So this is all about aligning the incentives properly and making sure that we're encouraging people to reduce demand when demand needs to be reduced, and we're not accidentally encouraging people to reduce demand at times when it's not actually saving money for either us or the grid, and we end up underfunding the distribution system. So this is more about aligning incentives properly than it is about discouraging people from reducing demand.
Okay. I think that's an important clarification, especially that our demand peak is midday, unlike the grid.
And I think we can clarify that for the finance committee as well. We can work on that in the report.
I've made a note to do so.
That's it. Thank you. Thank you, Eric, and Jonathan also.
Let's see, Commissioner Bowie.
Thank you for that conversation. This whole piece actually applies very much to my question. So it seems as though a lot of the difference between demand and consumption that we're talking about includes a geographic element. And I was curious as whether as we're moving towards sort of time variant rates, whether those time variant rates can include a granular geographic component that kind of captures much more of that demand detail in there, and whether that's been a consideration of the COSA. Sorry, I can rephrase that if the question wasn't clear. Just sort of thinking about the system where demand follows substations and nodes, and that the cost on the system to, say, expand into an area is a very geographic need. It's not something that we cross-subsidize that anyway. We bake everyone down into rate classes. And so as we increase the need on demand in one area, the rest of the customer base within the rate class is also paying for that similar demand or that expansion into that area. And I may be exposing some degree of ignorance on this. So I'll pause there. Does that question sort of get to some of this, that demand is geographic?
I would agree there probably is a geographic element to it. And it's always something that we can look into as to whether or not we would actually, so you're talking about having different pricing for different customers within Palo Alto in different geographic areas, depending on how, okay. Is that close to what you're thinking?
The question, I guess, is along that, and the sophistication of that question, or what that would look like, may not be worth actually breaking it down to that granular level. However, I guess in principle, the question is there a value to sort of breaking down time variant rates on a geographic basis?
Maybe I think we would be recovering, if they're using more, we'd be collecting that to higher costs from them using more. We would get that from them out of a time of use system. We can look into it, but I don't know if necessarily that would be something that we would look at, having different pricing within Palo Alto for the same class of customers. But we could discuss that possibility and look. I think it'll be quite a complex analysis, though. But that's what we're here to hear, what you have to suggest, and we can take a look at that and see what the feasibility is on that. So.
Following to it was a little about how we can sort of create the incentive for demand in certain areas and to increase utilization. So just that example of DC fast charging, if a company is looking to come in and install somewhere and there's a place where there is an advantageous geographic time of use rate, they may install there, or they may put storage into a place where there is a less advantageous geographic time of use rate. So that was kind of my thinking as I was listening to the earlier conversation of maybe this is one of those solutions to it. But again, the sophistication of analysis and how you actually create that thing might be too difficult to get into. But that's my.
So Commissioner, the way to tackle this may be more through exactly what you were talking about, programs, being really strategic with our programs and incentives, trying to make sure that DC fast charging or workplace charging ends up in places where we have spare capacity that we want people to be using, and where we tend to have a fair amount of capacity on our system. I think where that's probably going to not be the case, and part of this comes from the fact that Palo Alto used to be industrialized, and we're built for an industrialized community as opposed to an office community in a lot of the sections of our system. But in the residential areas, as we start to add, if we start adding more EV loads and electrification loads, that's where we might start seeing some constraints. And so I think being really strategic with programs that, make sure that people use at certain times of the day, or that they install technologies that will help to reduce those impacts on the system, I think we can, that's where we want to be really strategic with encouraging that through our programs and through making sure that our rates actually reflect the proper incentives when it comes to time of use. So it'll probably, because of that division between the residential areas and the rest of the city in terms of capacity, it'll probably show up in terms of the way our residential rates are designed versus the way the non-residential rates are designed rather than on a geographic basis. But we can focus our programs on the geographic basis. I think that's how we handle that.
Great, and thank you for coming along the ride as I tried to kind of talk through what I was thinking there on that question. I appreciate it.
No, it's a good question, and I think yeah, insightful.
Thank you. I had a second question though. It's sort of following on Vice Chair Siegel's question about the flex rate signals, and just thinking about sort of how that could be kind of framed in the demand response. So the inverse of a price spike is to create an incentive for those who actually can reduce their demand. There are customers that don't necessarily have the ability to abate their use. And it seems a bit punitive to use a stick rather than a carrot. So those are my two questions. Thank you very much.
I know we do have existing demand response programs, and we can see how we can try to incorporate those with our rate offerings. So yes.
Yeah, are there any other commissioners? I guess I had just a couple of questions. One was around net energy metering and whether the COSA will affect NEM 1 or NEM 2, or is there a NEM 3 coming? What's the interplay between a new COSA and our net energy metering rates?
So I would say that, so for NEM 1, they are subjected, so whatever standard rates we adopt for all customers, NEM 1 would follow. So if we had, say, minimum charges, fixed charges, if we had time of use for all customers and we went away from tiered entirely, or we went, say, for instance, our uniform rates, that would follow through to the NEM 1 customers as well.
So just to clarify, if there was a fixed, so if there was a fixed monthly charge, then NEM customers that maybe had, sort of zeroed out their monthly rate would start paying the fixed monthly charge.
Correct. But
Okay.
it would, but the restriction there is that you can't charge NEM customers something different from what you charge the rest of your customer, like that
Right. So
customer
whatever the
base.
fixed
So, yeah.
monthly charge was in dollars a month, that's what would apply. Okay.
Correct. Yeah. For NEM 2, it's actually a fairly simple program that you pay for what you use, you pay the standard rate or whatever rate schedule you're on, but what you get paid back is that avoided cost element for what you generate back into the meter. That's actually, that program's fairly easy. It doesn't really get changed.
And that
sort of
avoided
effective.
cost is calculated with the methodology that's set forth in the COSA?
Not in the COSA. We have a separate methodology that we use for calculating that. That's a market avoided cost. So yeah, we update that every year. So yeah, that one will not be affected by the COSA at all. So
okay. And then is there a NEM 3 coming someday, or is NEM 2 that's for all the additional solar capacity that gets added?
That's for all additional solar capacity. I'm reading up on what the PG&E, and I know there's the NEM 3 coming along for the in the IOU markets. So I'm following that and seeing what's going along there. I don't have really plans for it right now here, but we are following on to see where that evolves in the California market in general. So
would there be any reason to sort of support a transition to a NEM 3? Any reason would want that in there?
At this point in time, I don't believe so. We could be swayed depending on how those designs change, swing out in the market. But at this point in time, I'm not thinking so. So
got it.
Yeah.
And then and then the other thing I wanted to ask about was minimum charges and fixed charges.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't really mentioned directly on the design guidelines 1 through 5.
Mm-hmm.
unless I missed them, but they're mentioned a few times in the report.
Mhm.
One time, I think well, so in one way that I don't understand, which is in the discussion of guideline 3 on page 4, certain rate structures may disincentivize customers from taking up electrification measures such as fixed or minimum monthly charges. I actually don't follow that logic. Can you explain that to me?
So again, if you go in and you set a minimum or a fixed charge that's too high, so first up, minimum or fixed charges allow the utility to collect costs that are incurred regardless of whether or not customer uses power, such as billing, meter reading charges, that sort of thing,
Right.
but also a certain portion of the distribution. How much distribution cost you throw into a minimum or fixed charge is a matter of sort of design fundamentals. That's one of the areas where you can have a little bit of leeway or play. And some places have really high minimum or fixed charges. Having those types of things can sometimes disincentivize people from moving on things like solar because
so that
more than
I
offsets
see.
against what,
Taking it can disincentive.
And-
I thought it meant, sorry, when I said I didn't understand electrification measures, I assumed we were talking about electrifying your water heater and space heating and so forth, not adding solar. I see the connection if it's a disincentive to generate your own. Okay. Right, because otherwise it shouldn't disincentivize people from just using more electricity, transitioning from gas.
No, exactly. Well, if you're going to, and ideally you switch off of gas and then you move, and so, that's the global and, global goal in the long term. We go away from carbon heavy intensive resources and we move towards more electric, but, there's always as we become more efficient, and we do have cases where, people are using people are using less electricity, but we're buying more devices and we're getting better about how we use, making sure that we do adequately collect those charges, just like what we have in water. We collect the billing and a certain amount of distribution charge in there, to make sure that we still stay whole and that we're not subject to quite as much market swing.
Yeah, I mean, it
usage
certainly
swing,
makes
rather.
a lot of sense to me to have a minimum charge or a fixed charge. And so I see it as a work item, and I guess, but it's not a design guideline. Can you help
It's
me
not
understand
designed-
the
it's a-
difference?
Yeah, it's a work item that we want to do and making sure that it fits within our design guidelines, that it's adequately, that the design guidelines, that we don't create unnecessary barriers. We want to make sure that if we go forward with a minimum or a fixed charge, that they don't go against any of the design guidelines that we've put forth. So don't want to set them too high, don't want to set them too low. So
I think one could formulate a design guideline that addressed minimum or fixed charges. If that were something that we wanted that the UAC wanted to express, the importance of making sure to collect a certain minimum amount of operational revenue as a priority, I think that would be possible. But we are going to look at that regardless in the cost of service study.
I mean, I leave it to you whether it should be a guideline. I'm glad to see it's on the list of consideration. I mean, it certainly is, I think, even for customers on the old net energy metering rates, make obvious use of the city's infrastructure, and it does feel appropriate. And that would be then a difference from how our rates are designed right now, if I'm not mistaken. So well worth looking into would be my feedback. All right, well, that was it for me. Are there any other follow-up questions? Councilmember Philseth, did you have anything you wanted to contribute?
I'm going to see this twice more, so looking forward to the UAC's feedback.
All right. Well, then, thank you very much, Mr. Keniston. Appreciate it. Oh my gosh, no, this is an action item. So let's see. So do you have a suggested motion?
I guess,
I know that it's recommending to the Finance Committee rather than to the council.
so I get the motion would be, are you willing to recommend the existing design guidelines as we have in attachment A, or would you like to make any amendments or changes to that before we move forward with them?
I guess I have some interest in adding the COSA and rate design should support transition to minimum or fixed monthly charges, but I see Vice Chair Siegel has her hand up.
It was along the same lines, whether that needs to get incorporated into the guidelines to be factored in. I thought that was an excellent point that Chair Forcell raised. And I was a little unclear from your answer whether it should get incorporated in the guidelines. Is it risk slipping out of consciousness if it's not?
I don't think it'll risk slipping out of consciousness. It's definitely something that we're going to look at, but if you do want to add it as a guideline, totally amenable to doing that, should you wish to. So
I think if there's any reason not to do it, I prefer to add it and make sure it's there. And then this is the document that lives with the city.
Commissioner Bowie?
And I would like to at some point revisit the topic of the geographic rates. However, I think just sort of mulling over what we discussed, that it would probably be better served once we have a couple years of AMI data at our disposal and when time of use has been developed a little more before kind of getting to that point. But I did want to sort of make that note that at some point it would be interesting to revisit this topic.
I'm definitely looking forward to when AMI is in and looking at heat maps of the city and seeing how everything runs. That's going to be,
For
I'm
sure.
a rates wonk, so that'll be fascinating for me. But
All right, well then maybe I will go ahead and move that the commission recommend that the Finance Committee approve the design guidelines as stated with the addition of a sixth guideline to support a transition to fixed or monthly charges.
I second.
All right. Then I'll go ahead with roll call. Vice Chair Siegel?
Yes. Approved.
Commissioner Bowie?
Yes.
Commissioner Metz?
Yes.
Commissioner Johnston?
Yes.
And I approve as well, and I appreciate the real time.
Yeah, do we want to make sure that we have the language
language in
the
front of us?
motion here?
Yeah, it was just verbal, including that the COSA and rate design should support a transition. I'm just borrowing language from the existing design guidelines. So it should support a transition to fixed or monthly charges. Monthly minimum charge. Yeah.
I think we can craft that guideline. You don't need to see the language tonight. We can craft that for finance.
100%. Yes.
Great.
Thank you. All right. Moving along then, do we have any commissioner comments or reports from meetings or events? All right. Sounds like none of us have been anywhere interesting utilities wise this last month. All right, then our final agenda item is future topics for upcoming meetings. And we have 12-month rolling calendar with several items on it already. And I think, you know, as usual, we can make suggestions for what we'd like to see added to this. And then I would also like to maybe have a brief discussion of what we think is a higher priority to ask staff to bring to us sooner than later. I know staff is really busy and has a lot going on, among other things, with the SCAP. So I just want to be, you know, yeah, see if we can layer the, you know, just laundry list of topics we're interested in with suggestions of what's higher priority. But let's start with items that are perhaps not on this list that we think we should be looking into. Commissioner Metz.
Yes, well, what I'd like to recommend we, you know, get in here a little more explicitly, one that's semi on here, which is resiliency and local generation, I think is really important. It's on the list at the bottom, sort of, but not on the calendar part. The other is emergency preparedness and response. You know, having, you know, minimal bits of energy available to, you know, residential neighborhoods or possibly school. We need to figure out exactly how to do it, but some way of having minimal amounts of energy available in an emergency.
Do you see that as two topics or one that is just emergency response and resiliency combined?
It's probably two topics. I mean, emergency is sort of the, you know, ultimate resiliency is having energy you really, really need it the most. I would look to, you know, welcome other people's thoughts on whether that should be two or one. I think I mostly see them as two separate things that sort of need to be connected. Because if you started with some very, very minimal energy for emergency response, you can envision how it could be broadened over time to, you know, provide a resilient tier of electricity that's broader and not only for emergencies.
You know, I just want to say we've gotten some direction from council when we took the AB 2514 report on energy storage to them to come back with an assessment of the resources needed to address this resiliency topic. And so we're starting work on that. And maybe the way to tackle this is to review that proposal or that scope with the UAC at some point. We're talking about it with the ad hoc subcommittee. That's the arena where we're directed to come back, but getting some feedback on that might be a way to address this topic before we talk with the ad hoc subcommittee.
I think that'd be great. I mean, I think would improve your response to the ad hoc subcommittee, but also having your input, you know, from the professional side of the house in terms of how we could achieve that and what some of the pitfalls are would be, at least to me, be very valuable.
Can you tell us, is the ad hoc subcommittee a subcommittee of the council, or is that
I'm sorry,
public
yes, the
community
council's
members?
ad hoc subcommittee on sustainability that's handling review of the SCAP. So council members Cormack and Burt.
Okay,
So
gotcha.
the council directed us to return to that subcommittee for discussion of this topic, but we might be able to review the proposal we're taking to them with the UAC before we take it to them.
Okay. Yeah, I would second having interest in that. Let's see, other commissioners. I did notice when looking at the list of items to be scheduled that there were some that I think we've talked about that seem to be missing. And now I'm suddenly, I have to make sure that it's not because they're scheduled. I think somebody had mentioned an outage review, continuing the discussion of outages, but maybe I'm imagining that. I know Director Batchelor did come back to us with that.
Yeah, and there is going to be some more updates on that in the coming months on the outage review. I will be making a presentation on that. Well, I'm guessing probably October, November timeframe.
Okay.
But I can put it on. We'll put it on the calendar.
And also, I think there had been a request for an understanding of, I think this came from Commissioner Scharf, undergrounding, like what would it take to just underground the whole city? And again, I'm not proposing this as a priority, just that we don't lose track of the request.
I think that that's where we can rewrite it, but that's a 10-year WGW and electric project review.
Okay.
So, but I think that Commissioner Scharf was more around undergrounding, specifically undergrounding of the electric
yes.
system, within the next 10 years, and then coming back with what that cost might look like. But I think that we were going to incorporate this to give you an overview of kind of what also the water, gas, wastewater would also be doing in that period of 10 years.
My understanding of, well, then maybe I misunderstood the 10-year water, gas, wastewater, and electric project review, because my understanding was that we had asked for, it was actually a retroactive look at sort of planned versus actual construction. And it came up in the context of a sense that, well, that we weren't proceeding with construction at the planned pace, and just wanting to like look back over the last decade, what did we think we were going to build versus what did we actually build?
Okay. Yeah, I had a whole different concept of that. So okay. So thank you.
And again, like this is just for like completeness of the list, but not for saying that this is the highest priority. And the other one that I thought, again, that we had talked about was, I was in response to a community member who had a concern about total suspended solids, and in leading to a request to sort of have a discussion of water quality.
Oh, was this the request to look at feeling the water quality is because of solid pieces that are actually in the water system itself?
It was suspended solids instead of dissolved solids.
Yeah.
And sort of like, are we measuring that? Should we be, if we're not? I mean, the community member had a whole sort of proposal for a filtration plant, which I don't think that's the ask for the discussion topic. It's just sort of an understanding of what we measure and why, and if we should be looking at suspended solids in addition to dissolved solids.
We met with the individual after the meeting. Had operations and engineering. We actually had a discussion talking about, because one of his ideas was to actually put filtration in the main system itself. And as we were explaining to him that we have 4 different directions where we're actually pulling water into the city, that we would have to build actually 4 different filtration systems because it's not the same pipeline doesn't feed the higher entire city portion of it. So, but you know, we can come back and talk a little bit about water quality itself, kind of what we test, what we do, what some of the results that we have found. So we can do that portion of it.
Yeah, I think that was the request. I know Commissioner Scharf was interested in that as well. So, all right, well, Commissioner Bowie has been waiting very patiently here while I list items that I felt like had been mentioned in the past to be on the to be scheduled list. Go ahead, Commissioner Bowie.
No problem. I was looking through the minutes from last meeting just to make sure that it was on there. But I think that we had left a general kind of item around cybersecurity and data handling as we move further into AMI and the fiber provisions. And so that was one thing. There was a question, therefore, so about third-party penetration testing and just some more information on how we approach cybersecurity moving forward.
Yeah, I see that one on the list, and sorry, on the to be scheduled list on the
Great
12-month rolling calendar. It says cybersecurity. So to your point, there were some sort of specific items that we hoped that would address. And yeah, I think that's one that is potentially hard to talk about in a, well, I'll leave it as, obviously we don't want to have a public meeting like with an audit of all of any security flaws that have been discovered, but whatever staff can share, I think there's interest in. But so given all this long list of things that we could be talking about and that we're interested in, I'm curious, commissioners, what do you feel is, your top priority, maybe one or two items? Vice Chair Siegel.
Thanks. Well, I would say cybersecurity and, to some extent, physical security that goes with that. So, and if you want to put penetration testing into that as well, and perhaps we need to schedule a separate meeting for that. I appreciate that, but that would be my top priority discussion topic.
Commissioner Johnston?
So I agree with Vice Chair Siegel that I'd like to hear the discussion about cybersecurity kind of sooner rather than later. I would put that high on the list. And to the extent that the November scheduled discussion on reliability and resiliency doesn't include it, I would hope that it would include the point that Commissioner Metz made about kind of emergency preparedness.
Commissioner Metz, Bowie, Councilmember Felseth, Commissioner Metz.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest, as Commissioner Johnson pointed out, with resiliency on the agenda, and also the comments that Director Ebdenschein mentioned, that sounds like is already in play. Maybe in terms of priorities, we also need to think about timelines. So maybe the emergency preparedness and response discussion is kind of immature at this point, and it might be a good idea. I'd be willing to initiate, just have a conversation with some of the utility folks and some of the emergency services folks together to think about, like some of the baby steps about how we get that started.
So you're saying you'll take that on to reach out to some staff members for discussions, and we can have a full-fledged UAC at a later time?
Yeah, I think it's premature to have a meeting of this group. I mean, we obviously don't have a presentation from staff. They haven't really worked on this. So probably is worth doing some spade work first, and then we can, get a serious discussion before the commission.
All right. Commissioner Bowie?
Yes, I'll just reiterate the cybersecurity piece as well as the resiliency efforts.
Okay. And Councilmember Felseth?
I was just going to offer on the cybersecurity front, Council had a fairly deep dive with IT on cybersecurity within the last year, and we did it in a closed session for exactly the reasons that you folks talked about. So I think if you wanted to get a cyber security discussion for utilities, I think you would be able to do it in closed session, and that would be the way to do it.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think that'd be great if we were able to pull it off, and hopefully, you know, if the materials already exist for the council's discussion, then it isn't too great of a burden to staff to recycle those.
Ours was fairly broad, so I mean, you guys would be doing a deep dive on utilities, and so that, I mean, that would add value.
Great. Commissioner Bowie.
And I sort of want to add a kind of caveat to the cybersecurity piece that I keep adding on data handling as well, but just sort of how we are as a platform, not just whether we are protected or unprotected, just about the general sense of how we use data as well.
Do you want to clarify or give an example of what that means?
It was just the approach last in our meeting with AMI, talking about what we do with that data once we have it. How is it publicly available? How much information is involved in it? Who it goes to? We got answers to some of that last time, but just how we use data as we accrue it, where it's
So not just the risk of being hacked, but just even within the city.
Well, the ability to hack data is much more sophisticated, I think, than just a direct attack. You see it in sort of like geolocation data that you can figure out someone's identity. If you have even a data set that has been completely cleaned of any personally identifying information. So, you know, you could get a lot of that just from a clean data set and how we approach that. It's just a little bit maybe different than cybersecurity alone, and just kind of
okay.
to add that dimension to the discussion.
Okay. Well, okay, it sounds like we have two clear priorities have emerged around cybersecurity and data handling, and resiliency, which is already scheduled. So Director Batchelor, I hope that's helpful going forward.
Yes, thank you.
And then but, you know, and like I said, I hope we just don't lose track of the other requested items if they can just stay on the list.
Yep.
So, well, great. Thank you for providing the informational reports about the work plan and the quarterly report. And I think that's it then for tonight's Utilities Advisory Commission meeting. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Second.
All right, and we usually don't vote formally, but rather wave goodbye to agree to adjourning. All right, thanks everybody. Appreciate it. Good discussions tonight.
Thank you.
Take care.